Does gender inequality activism go both ways? I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. The Journal of Experimental Social Psychology put out a paper a couple months ago seeking to explore whether or not gender activism went both ways. In other words, are the issues of women held in a similar regard as those that plague men? The short answer is no, as revealed by the report. This really isn't that shocking to me, but the details about the differences were very interesting. They reveal that even when looking to correct a perceived bias, it's easy to fall into bias yourself. Here's a paragraph from the abstract. Not all instances of gender inequality are equally concerning. An emphasis on women's underrepresentation in science, technology, engineering, and math roles has not been matched by a similar concern about men's underrepresentation in healthcare, early education, and domestic roles. They've actually given an acronym to that, healthcare, early education, and domestic roles, and they call it HEED, H-E-E-D. Now, some people may say, well, who cares about HEED? STEM is where all the money's at. First of all, there are high-paying positions within HEED, and the report went over that. They were able to deduce that payment was not the primary motivation behind these decisions. And on top of all that, not everything is about money. In terms of this report, it's actually about a perceived bias is what's drawing these conclusions. In particular, this trend is alarming, especially within early education, because the reality is that there exist households without positive male role models. Young boys need those figures in their lives to carve out some semblance of proper behavior. If they can't get it at home, school really is the next best place. If you can't get it at school, the options become increasingly less effective. Think about it. You spend maybe 7 hours a day at school, then another 6 hours at home, and then roughly another 8 hours sleeping. There isn't really much time left over to seek those relationships out if they're not handed to you in the household or in the education system. I think every child deserves some form of gender role model in their developmental years. The lack of males in early education is contrary to that, and it's definitely not helping anything. Now, I have to also make a distinction here. Do I claim that systemic barriers and a hypothetical matriarchy regime are plotting to keep men out of these fields? Of course not. I'm not going to cast blame to those outlets. I also don't think that patriarchal regimes are plotting to keep women out of STEM fields. Quite the opposite. As of late, there is a major push to increase the participation of women in those areas. In the case of things like early education and healthcare, I think the most basic rule of thumb here is that those careers are simply not attractive to men, and that's generally speaking. Now, why are they not attractive? That's a good question. The reasons for not being that incentivizing may have something to do with being completely women-dominated. Maybe there's something to do with stereotypes there. Maybe even something to do with wages. We aren't entirely sure because the issue has not been delved into enough, and there's clearly a lack of, first of all, activism surrounding it, and second, any attention to the glaring issues here. The paper then outlines results from 4 studies that document a tendency to more strongly support the inclusion of women in male-dominated careers compared to the inclusion of men in female-dominated jobs. That probably can explain to some degree why we don't have the issue being explored further, because currently it's not really the feel-good or trending thing to do. It's also stated that this asymmetry in support for social action towards change is predicted by beliefs about what the ideal gender representation should be and the perceived causes of gender imbalance in each career type. Notably, gender representation in careers and not salary is the key factor underlying discrepant support for the change. And as I mentioned before, it's not about the money. It's actually about perceived righteousness when it comes to gender representation in careers. It doesn't matter if it's a high-paying job, a low-paying job. When that's controlled for, it still comes down to the sense of inequality that is causing a lot of people to resort to measures like activism. Now, generally, I take a more merit-based approach when it comes to topics like this. I think that's the ideal way. Maybe you could say it's the end goal to strive for, but that's only applicable when people have equal opportunity. As I mentioned before, sometimes it's easy to mix that up with equal outcome. Equal opportunity is an amazing thing. Equal outcome is disastrous. Forcing upon a quota is a terrible idea as opposed to empowering people from the grassroots. Here's an example of that. Things like affirmative action, that's trying to control the outcome, referring to the ideology of equal outcome, and it's really glorified discrimination. It hurts some people and it benefits some others. It's literally taking what they're trying to fight against, turning it around and using it on oftentimes, or even most of the time, innocent people who have nothing to do with the prior discrimination that the group you're trying to help now faced. Then what happens? 50 years down the road, you have to reverse it? It's really a vicious cycle and it leads nowhere. My ideal reality is based around a meritocracy where the most meritorious individual, the most qualified person, is the one who gets the job. And right now there's so many factors that stop that from happening, but down the road, that's what we should be striving for, because we do want everyone to be on an equal playing field. Now here's another example to really clarify what exactly the difference is between equality of opportunity versus equal outcome. Equal opportunity means that everybody in your community has the option to go to aviation school if they wanted to. Money really isn't a concern because they can get loans and stuff like that. And if they really want to be a pilot, they apply, they go to school, they all get the same test, the same level of education, and the people who perform the best will presumably get the jobs. This is regardless of your race, gender, or any other factors that you want to bring forward. Now to get here, we have to make sure that everyone is treated as an individual and everyone's playing by these same set of rules. But in today's day and age, different groups have different rules, and that complicates the issue, and I'm not too sure it actually helps people in the long run. What's happening now is something more akin to this equal outcome approach, and that's really idiotic because what it tries to do is equalize the outcome without thinking about or accounting for what happened in the beginning to lead to the outcome. So with that same train of thought, dumbing it down, going back to the pilot example, let's say you and your friend both want to be pilots. Equal outcome would be you flip a coin and there's a 50% chance you get it and a 50% chance that he gets it. Maybe you went to aviation school. Maybe you're a trained pilot. And him? No, he played video games and he has a degree in economics. But equal outcome, everyone should be guaranteed that equal outcome regardless of skill and any other things. There's no meritocracy involved, and we're only concerned with the outcome and making it fair for everyone. It's really idiotic, and it's not always that simplified in the real world, but the crux of it is still the same. Forgetting about merit and giving people things based on perceived hardship. Oftentimes too, and this is the part that gets me, you don't even know if the person that you're trying to supposedly help has even gone through anything. You are making an assumption about them based on things like their gender or their race. It really is backwards. And one more thing to note here, not everything has to be 50-50 down the line when it comes to distributions. There's something called freedom and choice. Look at industries like plumbing, for example. That's majority men, but I don't see any pushes to equalize that. Look at underwater welding, another high-paying job, but it's majority men. Once again, not really that same push there. There's a picky and choosy aspect to this whole thing. Of course, systematic barriers need to be removed. If there's a law that says women can't run in the election, women can't be this, obviously that's not what we want, and it goes against equal opportunity. I am not for that. I want equal opportunity. The issue here, though, is never just univariable. There's something called personal preference as well, and that plays a role here too. The report then goes into great depth about the research and the findings that they did, and the overarching theme is still the same throughout. It's that present day gender equality isn't really about gender equality in the fullest sense. It's more so just half of the pie. If it was about gender equality in the broadest terms, both genders would be looked at with the same degree of seriousness, and there is also one more thing to take a look at. There are other differences between men and women, and some of those are not so desirable to equate. But there's one more thing too that I think I should mention. Despite popular notions, men and women are not the same. And that's why there are some differences in terms of picking careers and whatnot. That's not to be confused with saying one group is better than the other, but to pretend that both of these parties here are the exact same, they are symmetrical in every way possible, it's a delusion. And now let me get back to what I was talking about before. This thing of gender equality. Well, there are some things that aren't so rapidly being approached with that same mindset of trying to equalize the trends. For example, men have higher rates of successful suicide. That's terrible. Men die at higher rates, and they're drafted into wartime conflicts in greater ratios. They are more likely to serve harsher sentences in the court of laws. They are less likely to be taken seriously about domestic abuse. You can even look at things like when a divorce goes on in the courts. Men are far less likely to get custody over the children. There is a long list here. Now, I understand that one reason why light is not shed here as much as it is with women is because historically, women have needed greater attention. They faced some crazy injustices that men didn't have to go through, such as the battle for the right to vote. Feminism has been cultivated over the centuries, and they come from roots like that. Men have not had such groups behind them, and maybe that speaks towards why these issues don't really get brought to the popular forefront of media. There really isn't a mouthpiece to do it. At the end of the day, though, everyone has problems, and that's really the key thing here. Women have their own set of issues. Men do too. I don't think the ultimate goal of men is to just oppress women. Maybe for some men it is, and the reverse is true too. I don't think the ultimate goal for women is to bring down men. For some of them, it's true. The reality is everyone has issues. Things like childbearing have adverse effects on careers. That goes for women. Men also have issues, and the popular media paints a picture where this oppressive patriarchy favors men in all possible regards. It's a utopia to be a man in the developed world. This is simply not true, and more learning about what really is sorely needed. Now, to finish up, there is one thing I want to leave you guys with, and it's been super controversial, but it's documented, it's been researched, and it is a real trend. It's called the gender equality paradox, and essentially, countries with more gender equality have fewer females going through STEM degrees and graduating with them. Interesting, right? It's a paradox because the more egalitarian a society becomes, the more difference between men and women occur naturally. Less women go into STEM. Countries who are less advanced with their equality regimes, they face a different challenge because they have these quotas and they're pumping up the number of women in these STEM fields, incentivizing people to go into them. But, as I said before, as you reach a higher level of egalitarianism, the trend reverses and women leave the STEM fields and they go into other things. Make of that what you will, but this has been documented in countries like Finland, Norway, and Sweden. These places are touted for their extremely high levels of equality, but in places like Algeria and Albania, those places actually have a greater percentage of women in their STEM fields and women graduating with those degrees. Researchers actually draw a very interesting conclusion about that data. They find that places that are less egalitarian have lower social structures to help you if you're struggling. So there's an incentive to go into things like engineering because you can make a lot of money and you can take care of yourself. What's that really tell you though about STEM? Do people want to go into it because they love STEM? They love engineering, they love math, they love science? Or is it because it gives them a ticket to a comfortable lifestyle? But if people already have a comfortable lifestyle and money isn't a consideration, well, obviously it's a consideration, but to what degree? It's not the difference between them starving or dying and them having a decent house to live in. It's a more minute difference in places like Finland and Sweden and whatnot. There's very good social systems in place to make sure you don't encounter those horrible realities. And in those places, women are choosing different fields to go into, presumably going into things that they like more. Very interesting data, and things like that, actual research, have to be included in this debate. Like many things in North America, the topic has become super polarized, but by learning a little bit more about the truth of the matter, hopefully that allows for a more civil conversation to be had. So, that's about it for today. Thanks for joining me on the Perri platform. If you enjoy the content, be sure to leave a review and share, and you can find me on Twitter at Perri Platform. I'll see you soon.